I don't think it's imminent like the next couple of days or probably even the next couple of years, quite honestly. But we need to take this very seriously. When a dictator says that he's going to do something and he has a past record of doing what he says he's going to do, often very nasty things, you have to take that seriously. And I think that the military drills that were done in the wake of the Pelosi visit were a clear warning that China has capabilities that it didn't have during the last crisis 25 years ago in this region. So, yeah, very serious indeed. And this is the first time that they have explicitly threatened force if Taiwan doesn't buckle.
When it comes to the international reaction, we saw multiple statements in Washington before Pelosi's visit and after the visit. And we're hearing rhetoric from the administration supporting one China policy still. We're hearing criticism of one China policy from Congress, for instance. Do you think that Beijing is getting unnerved by these conflicting messages from Washington, and how can it react, and will it react to that?
Well, I think Beijing is unnerved because it's clear that the Taiwanese people don't want to be ruled by the Chinese Communist Party. And so I think they had this illusion maybe a half a century ago that Taiwan would just fall under its control, that it would be easy enough. I mean, remember that this was a civil war. The losing party, the Kuomintang, the KMT, fled to Taiwan. A lot of those people wanted unification with China. They might not have liked the communists, but a whole generation has grown up since 1949 when all this happened. They have never lived in China, and from what they see, they don't want to live there. So I think that's what's unnerving Beijing more than anything else, because they see Taiwan drifting away. They used to say all Chinese people want to be reunified. It's clear that the people of Taiwan don't want to be reunified under Beijing. So yes, there is concern that Washington continues to sell arms and continues to support effectively a de facto, if not independent, autonomous Taiwan. And so that unnerves Beijing because they see the prize drifting away. I would say that even somebody as hardline as Mao and Deng Xiaoping, previous generations of Chinese leaders, were willing to sort of let things take its course. Because it's clear that China dominates the region, and of course it'll dominate Taiwan, even if the communist flag is not flying over the presidential palace in Taipei. But the current leader, Xi Jinping, is very, very impatient, and he seems to be willing to risk everything, risk peace and stability in East Asia for this goal of reunifying, which is going to be horrific if there's a war. It would mean the destruction of much of Taiwan, but it would mean countless people potentially dead on mainland Chinese as well as Taiwanese, perhaps others. So I really don't understand the riskiness and the assertiveness, the aggressiveness with which Xi Jinping is approaching this issue.
So do you feel that his upcoming elections are somehow affecting his behavior in this realm?
Hard to say. I mean, clearly his desire for an unprecedented third term as general secretary has prompted him to act boldly. But I think it's now put him in a bit of a corner, right? Because Pelosi went and China was furious, so it needs to up the ante. Now it's changing the status quo. Now it's making war and conflict more likely sooner. So yeah, I think it's producing a bad situation. But I don't think things are going to magically get better if he gets a third term, because he has, for the first time, put a terminal date. He says there has to be unification by 2049. And so realistically, that means that we're going to see something within the next, let's say, 7 to 12 years, when he's still, assuming that Xi Jinping stays in power, is still in his political prime and is in a position to act. And the Chinese military is much stronger at that point.
Mark, do you see United States getting involved in a military conflict with China over Taiwan, and does Taiwan actually expect such support?
That is a great question. Clearly, the U.S. policy remains one of strategic ambiguity. There would be a lot of pressure, I think, for the U.S. to get involved. On the other hand, the U.S. has been through a couple of, decades of kind of unending war in the Middle East, in Afghanistan, and I don't know quite how much appetite the U.S. Public would have for an open-ended conflict with China. So hard to say. I think it's just going to depend on the circumstances at the time.
Mark, when the parallels are being currently drawn between Ukraine and Taiwan, do you see them legitimate? And do you see Chinese leadership drawing some kind of a lesson from what's happening in Ukraine now?
Yeah, I mean, those are great. Those are great questions. I'm not sure I have, anybody really has all the answers to that, but clearly the fact that you could have a great continental power like Russia invade a neighboring country in Europe, it's unbelievable. So I think that makes it, in a way, more likely that China might invade Taiwan. I think when we look at lessons, I think it's clear that Xi Jinping at least tacitly gave his blessing, his assent to Putin to invade Ukraine. I mean, it was just a few weeks earlier that they had met, and this great bromance of these two, some two of the most ruthless people in the world, proclaiming that their friendship had no limits. But I think that Xi Jinping and the Chinese have to be taken aback, first of all, by the resistance that the people of Ukraine have shown, but also by the support that democratic open societies have given, not just moral support, but material, money, weapons. And I think the fact that it has not been an easy victory for Russia has to give the Chinese some pause. On the other hand, I think if open societies kind of back off or they get tired, then Xi Jinping will take the lesson, okay, we could get away with Taiwan. Now, again, why would you want to invade a country where the people don't want you and in the process destroying it, killing people, destroying the economic infrastructure? I don't know. But I mean, Xi Jinping has other considerations that he's thinking of.
So, Mark, just following up on your question, why? Is there economic reasoning for the Chinese leadership? Is there more ideological reasoning to just keep talking about this unification? What do you see there at the core of this issue?
I don't think it's economics. Economics works better when you have peace than when you have war. And in fact, Xi Jinping has taken China down a real dead end, I think. I mean, 20 years ago when China got in, it's 20 years ago this last year, so that China got into the World Trade Organization, and Taiwan got in at the same time. I mean, it was a good thing. I mean, they traded more. I mean, there was a lot of cross-border investment, air travel opened up. I mean, China would be much better off just dominating Taiwan as a kind of satellite state. I mean, it's the big country in the region. It could do that. So it's really about ideology. It's about nationalism. It's about this kind of myth that China has been wounded, China has suffered, that China is a great 2,000, 5,000-year-old civilization, pick your number, and that Taiwan is theirs by right, and that China was carved up like a melon uh, by imperialist powers in the 19th century, and that it needs to get all its territory back. Well, in fact, the People's Republic has never controlled Taiwan and has never ruled over it, and I don't think there's any reason it should. But there's this kind of wounded nationalist narrative that's driving Xi Jinping, and that he unfortunately has stoked among hundreds of millions of Chinese people as well, which again limits his room for maneuver.
When it comes to parallels, coming back to Ukraine and Taiwan, there was a lot of talk about NATO, Ukraine, and how expanding NATO unnerved and infuriated the Russian president. And just last week, in the legislation that was introduced by Senator Menendez, it says that Taiwan should be called the biggest ally for the United States outside of NATO. Do you see any dangers there if we're talking about military alliances or even hints at military alliances like that?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think you raise a really important issue, and we have a kind of push, counter push. China's aggressive actions in the last 10 years since Xi Jinping took power have really sparked a counter reaction around the region. So you have the so-called Quad, which has seen Japan, Australia, India, and the US work together militarily. You're seeing very far-reaching military alliances between the U.S. and Australia. You're seeing, India drawn into working with the U.S. on a military basis in a way that it's never done in its 70 something years of history as an independent nation. It was always very proud to be non-aligned. Japan had, I guess, still nominally has a pacifist constitution, and yet it's rearming itself because of China. So there are dangers. I would argue that the Chinese are the ones that have prompted the arms race, but of course, China in turn, when other countries respond, then China feels that it needs to respond. So I'm afraid we're into a very, very dangerous, multi-year process of rearmament in the region. And I mean, it's heartbreaking because post 1945, East Asia saw the most rapid economic growth that anywhere in the world has ever seen. You had hundreds and hundreds of millions of people brought out of poverty in China, Taiwan, South Korea, Hong Kong, Singapore, all around the region. And I'm afraid that China's actions are putting all this at risk.